You should fire your CSM unless you want to lose your coaching business. Here's why. I want to ask you this. Have you experienced your CSM not delivering at the pace you expect? Or just being average? Clients complaining, CSM complaining that he or she has to do a lot of work when you know deep down that he or she is only being inefficient? At the start, you win by being an amazing coach, but not anymore. Because now you win in a different way. You win by coaching your team members into reaching their fullest potential. And this is true for your CSM or the rest of the team members, of your team members. So here's a piece of advice most people forget while training slash managing CSMs. You can't expect someone to do something they don't know. So, are you telling your CSM to help your clients, but you don't give them structure? That's on you, not on them. And that's the mistake most coaches make while they start getting out of delivery. They delegate without designing. And that's why the first thing I do with my clients is that I design their delivery so that they can deliver by design, not by default, not with chaos, with a ton of brute force. Expecting CSMs to act as if they were you without guidance, that speaks more about you than about your CSM. But if you're the one that has to be begging your CSM for attention, you didn't hire a CSM, you hired a problem. I was talking with a client of mine these days, and he was telling me essentially that he had to be the one kind of reaching out to his CSM instead of him reaching out to my client. And I was like, is that possible? So you're paying someone and you have to beg them to do the work? That's just a signal of a B player, or at least of someone that is not going to perform at your company. I remember when I was working on a startup a couple of years ago, I was like that as an employee, like literally like that. I would only expect my boss to send me messages for me to take action, which is of course mediocre and unfortunate. I ended up leaving and starting my whole thing. But if that's the case for one of your team members or more, you can't accept mediocrity. If you accept mediocrity, you're telling yourself you're mediocre because your team members are extension of your vision. But the thing is, most coaches and business owners don't even know what their vision is or aren't even aware that their team members have to look up to them, and they end up like performing whatever they however they want, and they forget their team members depend on them and their behavior depends on them. But in that case, you didn't hire a CSM, you hired a problem. Because you can solve your delivery as much as you want, but without proper talent in place, it won't work. So you either coach them up, coach your team members up, in this case your CSM up, or you coach them out. Here's how you can do that. So let's start with coaching a team member up, which means giving essentially all the tools they need to succeed. For example, when you delegate something, you need to tell them these 5 things. First, what to do. Second, what the deadline is. I think these two are the most basic ones. Then, why they should do it. What should be the motivation on doing the task. How they can get all that is required to complete the task. This is pretty important. Let's say, for example, that you're delegating a Zapier automation, but they don't have access to your Zapier account. Do you think they'll do it? And then you want to fire them, but you didn't even give them access to the things they needed. But you could also argue that an A player will also ask for it as soon as you give them the task, right? So that's something that you have to take into consideration. And then 5, how to do it. The step-by-step guide. If you don't have SOPs, standard operating procedures, of every task in your business, you're essentially being an employee of yourself, and you will not scale anything because there are no processes at all. Don't expect world-class execution when you're delegating in a mediocre way. I took a lot of time to realize this, but delegation is a job by itself, and you can suck at it. Let's go with the second piece. Coach team members out. So let's say you're incredible at delegation. You're incredible at coaching. You already read the coaching habit. You ask them the 7 questions. You do all of it. And then you're leading like a king by example. You're not one of those bosses that just say things but resting on their couch and not doing anything at all day, every day. You're leading like a king, but they're not keeping up to speed. You have to have a tough conversation with them. Divide that tough conversation in 2 parts. The first one is you need to have a preliminary meeting with the person. You have to tell them what you're expecting from the job in case they haven't heard of that before, because sometimes you think your team member is not performing, but they didn't know what you expected. So you had an invisible expectation and you never told them about that expectation, essentially. So you have to tell them what you're expecting from the job and then give them a clear deadline to adapt, a reasonable deadline to adapt. But you have to put in a deadline. Then you need to have the definite meeting. If they didn't succeed, if they didn't comply with this deadline and the results you were expecting, you have to be straightforward with them. You have to not hide, not over explain. You have to state the facts and tell the truth, essentially. And what this means in this context is that you need to have the conversation like a grown up adult and say, hey, there is something pretty delicate I want to touch on this meeting. I want to tell you this was a tough decision, but this is the decision that I have to make for the best future of the company and the rest of the people that is working here. I decided not to continue working with you. I want to thank you for everything and let me know if you have any questions. That's it. You don't have to over explain, you don't have to overthink, you don't have to do any of that. And then you don't negotiate. Once you decide, you decide. And that's all. And I made this mistake once when I had my coaching offer, in which I had more than 13 team members at one point. I went back and turned this conversation into a negotiation. And then I let that person continue, but that person, from that point moving forward, knew that my criteria was negotiable. You don't want to teach them, your team members, that lesson. It's one of the worst lessons you can teach them. So don't make that mistake. and DM me the word fire, and I'll give you a step-by-step guide on how you can decide if you should fire a team member or not. You can do it on @dejuanotalora on Instagram. Okay? See you in the next video.